Hello everyone, it's Max here from FMSCOUT. This is another installment of my Tactical Instruction Analysis series. Today we're going to have a look at the trigger press instruction in Football Manager and how the different levels of pressing affect the behaviors of players in FM22. The trigger press instruction can be found on this page here. I think this instruction used to be called a pressing intensity until last year in FM21, but now they changed the name to trigger press. So I'll be interchanging between the two terms in this video. Setting the trigger press instruction to either more often or much more often it's one of the most popular tactical choices made by us Football Manager players. In fact, I don't think I've ever used a tactic in Football Manager in the past few years that doesn't use a high pressing intensity. So today I'll be doing a series of tests trying to figure out how pressing intensity actually works in the game and trying to find out whether a higher level of pressing raises your chances of winning a match in Football Manager. As always, I've added a summary at the end of the video, so feel free to skip straight to the summary at the end of this video if you wish to do so. The experiment setup for today is pretty similar to my previous videos that I uploaded on this channel, but I'll do a brief recap of it anyway. Basically, what I did was I used the editor to set up a neutral match called a Test Cup, played between two teams, Team A and Team B. This match is played at a neutral venue, so there is no home ground advantage to either side of the match. The two teams are filled with clone players, also created using the editor, and these players they are 13 in all attributes, which means that the two teams, Team A and Team B, they are perfectly identical in strength. I've added a second manager in the game, so I'm in charge of both teams, Team A and Team B. Being in charge of both teams of the match like this, it allows me to really make sure that I'm in charge of the different variables in the game as tightly as possible. This is the tactic that I used for both teams today, Team A and Team B. It's a very generic looking 4-4-2 tactic. As you can see, there are no tactical instructions or player instructions that are active in this tactic. It's basically a tactic that's designed to be as bland and generic as possible so that it doesn't introduce any unwanted variables into my experiments. So first of all, I set the trigger press level of Team A to standard, and then I auto-simulated the match by sending the managers of both teams, Team A and Team B, on holiday for 1 day. At the end of every match, I went into the match report and I recorded a group of statistics that are relevant to the effects of pressing intensity, including the number of fouls made by the players, pass accuracy of the opposition team, Team B, ball possession of Team A, running distance recorded by players of Team A, the number of interceptions made by the players from Team A, the number of times ball possession was won by Team A, and finally, the fitness levels of players right after the match. I repeated the exact same match 20 times when the trigger press level was set as standard, and another 20 times when it was set as much more often, and finally another 20 times when the pressing intensity was set as much less often. So let's have a look at the results together. As always, I've collected all this info into an Excel spreadsheet, as you can see here, and I've converted all this data into a series of bar graphs. First, we have the percentage ball possession by Team A. This bar on the left is when the trigger press level was set as much more often. This bar in the middle is when the press level was set as standard, and this one here is when it was set as much less often. Remember, the sample size is 20 matches for each of these bars. So each of these values, they represent average values over 20 independent trials. So my hypothesis here was that with a higher pressing intensity, the percentage ball possession of Team A would go up because, the whole point of playing a pressing game in football is to take the ball away from the opposition as much as possible. But according to these bars, that doesn't really seem to be happening. So as you can see here, ball possession remains, the percentage ball possession remains more or less constant, regardless of the level of pressing intensity used by Team A. Next, we have pass accuracy recorded by Team B, which is the opposition team in these tests. Here, my hypothesis was that as you increase the pressing intensity of Team A, the pass accuracy of Team B would go down. Because if your players are being pressed all the time on the pitch, then it would naturally lead to players making more passes that are less accurate. So that was my hypothesis for this test. But again, that doesn't really seem to be happening according to these results. As you can see from these three bars, pass accuracy of Team B stays more or less constant regardless of the level of pressing that's used by Team A. Okay, next I have one big graph here that contains 4 different statistics. I've combined these 4 stats together into a single graph just so that I can go through all of them together. So this part here on the left is the number of fouls made by players from Team A. This part here is the number of ball interceptions made by Team A players. This part here is the number of times ball possession was gained by Team A players during the match. And this part here is the average running distance recorded by Team A players during the match. So my hypothesis was that all of these stats would go up as you increase the pressing intensity of Team A. So with the number of fouls per match, possession gained per match, and the running distance per match, you can see the values are slightly higher when the pressing intensity was much more often, compared to standard and much less often. But the differences between these bars, between the different pressing intensities, it's not that much. So I don't know whether these small differences are actually due to the bona fide effects of higher pressing intensity, or if it's just like a random statistical variation. I'll leave it up to you guys to decide. And finally, let's have a look at the level of player fitness after the match. Now, the way I recorded this data was slightly different from the previous statistics. When you play a match in Football Manager, the players gradually lose their fitness throughout the match, which is represented by these heart-shaped icons in the game. But there is no way to view the actual numerical values of player fitness while the match is still ongoing. So what I had to do was to simulate these trial matches manually, and straight after the match, I used the in-game editor to check the fitness levels of players before the players had a chance to recover. So let's have a look at the results together. In Football Manager, when the players are fully rested, the fitness level is 10,000. And then, as the match progresses, the fitness level would become lower and lower. So here in this graph, a lower value means that the players have become more tired as a result of the match. So when the pressing level was set as much more often, the fitness level of the players fell from, on average, from 10,000 down to 6,908. And here, when pressing intensity was set as standard, the fitness levels of players fell from 10,000 to 6,974. And finally, here, when pressing intensity was set as much less often, the fitness levels of players fell from 10,000 to 7,079. So I guess the players do fatigue a bit more when pressing intensity is set as much more often. Although, again, I think the differences between these 3 conditions, they're not massive. So considering that the differences in player fitness the differences are minor, I guess a recommendation I can make at this point is that if your team schedule isn't too busy in the game, maybe towards the start of the season, do feel free to crank up that pressing intensity of your team as much as you can, because yes, the players might tire out a bit more, but not by that much, as you can see from these bars. Of course, if you're going through a congested schedule, maybe during in the middle of the season where you have like 2 or even 3 matches in a week, then maybe turn down the pressing intensity a little bit, just to try to preserve the fitness of the players as much as possible. Right, now we're going to pivot to the second part of this video where I'm going to try to answer the following question. Does a high level of pressing intensity raise the chances of your winning for your team? For this experiment, I'm using the same setup as before. So I made these two teams, Team A and Team B, versus each other for a total of 1,200 times. And I recorded the number of wins, losses, and draws for both teams. Out of these 1,200 trials, half of them, 600 of them, was when the pressing intensity of Team A was set as much more often, and the other 600 was when the pressing intensity of Team A was set as much less often. And this time I rotate, in regards to the tactics, I rotated between three different tactics, 4-4-2, 4-2-3-1, and 5-3-2, just to have a bit of variety in the test conditions. So here are the results. When Team A was instructed to press much more often, they won a total of 253 times out of 600, whereas Team B won 211 times out of 600. On the other hand, when the pressing intensity of Team A was set as much less often, Team A won 216 times out of 600, while Team B won 245 times out of 600. So as you can see here, when Team A was instructed to press much more often, Team A was winning more than Team B, whereas when Team A was instructed to press much less often, Team B started winning more than Team A. So according to these results, it appears that all other things being equal, a higher pressing intensity will increase your chances of winning a match in Football Manager compared to a lower pressing intensity. And as always, I'm going to try to replicate these findings in a field test using a more realistic scenario. So I have the Community Shield match here between Leicester City and Manchester City, which happens at the start of the season in Premier League in England. And I'm in charge of Leicester City at the moment. And if I go into the tactics page here, you can see I'm going with the 4-3-3 gegenpress tactic because I guess this is the archetypical tactic in Football Manager that emphasizes a high level of pressing intensity. So I did a total of 600 trials with Leicester City. First 200 trials is when the trigger press level was set as much more often. Another 200 trials when the pressing intensity was set as slightly more often, and another 200 trials when the pressing intensity was set as much less often for Leicester City. And let's have a look at the results together. So first of all, when Leicester City was instructed to press much more often, they won 32 times out of 200. When the instruction was slightly more often, the number of wins for Leicester City fell to 29 out of 200. And lastly, when the instruction was much less often, the number of wins for Leicester City fell to 9 times out of 200. So as you can see here, there is a clear pattern that's going on in these results. A higher pressing intensity does lead to more number of wins for Leicester City, and a lower pressing intensity leads to lower number of wins for Leicester City. Okay, it's time to wrap things up. Here is a summary for today's video. 1. The different levels of pressing that you can choose in FM22, it didn't produce any significant difference in terms of player statistics. The stats that I thought might show a difference, such as ball possession, pass accuracy, the number of fouls, interceptions made per match, possession gained per match, and running distance per match, they all stayed more or less constant regardless of the level of pressing intensity. A possible exception to this may be the amount of fatigue suffered by the players during a match. So I did notice the players in my experiments become a bit more tired during the match when the pressing intensity was set as much more often, although the difference was not by a massive amount. 2. Higher pressing intensity resulted in a higher win rate in my experiments, while a lower pressing intensity led to a lower win rate. All things considered, my recommendation at this point is for you to set the pressing intensity of your team to much more often, as much as possible, when you play FM22. This is because there is very little downside to using high pressing intensity for your team. Yes, your players will fatigue a bit faster during the match if you set your pressing intensity as much more often. But the difference is not that much, as I have demonstrated in this video. So unless your team is going through a really congested schedule and you really need to do whatever you can to preserve the fitness of your players as much as possible, feel free to crank up that pressing intensity for your team, and it will reward you with more wins and more trophies. Okay guys, that's it for today's video. Do you agree with what I talked about today? What do you think about pressing intensity in Football Manager? Leave a comment below to let me know. Guys, I also have my own YouTube channel called Evidence-Based Football Manager. I also upload videos regularly there, so do check out my own channel as well. Link will be provided in the description below. On this channel, FMSCOUT, I will be continuing my analysis on tactical instructions in FM22. Alright guys, I'll see you all next time.